So the Toronto Globe and Mail published this story this morning. Green energy sector jobs surpass total oil sands employment is the headline. Wow, did you know that? Oh, it gets better. Here, let me read the first sentence in this news story in Canada's newspaper of record. Canada's green energy sector has grown so quickly and has become such an important part of the economy that it now employs more people than the oil sands. Hey, did you know that? I mean, forget the statistics and things like that. I'll get to that in a moment. I'm just asking you for a gut check here, a sense check, a reality check. I mean, we've all heard of the oil sands. They're huge. They're the news every day. We see pictures of them. We read stories about them. They're the subject of massive political debates. Fort McMurray, in the heart of the oil sands, is world famous, and it's now a booming city of about 100,000 people. If you're from Alberta, you surely know someone who works there. If you're from Atlantic Canada, especially Newfoundland, you probably know someone who works there too, probably a close friend or family member even, because it's such a massive employer of Canadians. It's huge for unions. It's huge for contractors. It's huge for construction, for engineering, for hotels and truck rentals and catering firms. Huge for airlines that commute workers in and out from as far away as St. John's. Everyone in the country knows about the oil sands, and most of us know that it's been the oil sands that have provided so many good jobs and so much tax revenue for the government and so many transfer payments to the have-not provinces over the past 10 years. You don't have to be an expert to know all of that. That's all common knowledge, right? Okay, now back up to our gut check. Do you know a single person in your life, a friend, a family member, who works making solar panels or wind turbines? Do you know of a single factory where they do that, or a town famous for their green industry? We know some towns are synonymous with other industries. Toronto has the banks and the media companies, the ad agencies. Windsor has the car factories. Halifax has the port and universities and the Navy, right? So have you ever heard of a place in Canada that makes a living off green technology? Again, I'm not being scientific here yet. I'll get to the facts in a moment. I'm just talking about how credulous you have to be, how naive, how unmoored from reality you have to be to actually publish that story with that headline and that first sentence. Here, I'll read a bit more from the Globe, Canada's newspaper of record, the leading business newspaper, the newspaper for serious people, for policymakers. Just read this. Ready? Let me quote. That means the 23,700 people who work in green energy organizations outnumber the 22,340 whose work relates to the oil sands, the report says. Well, let's start with just one oil sands company called Syncrude, just one. It has 8,500 direct workers. Those are just the people whose paychecks say Syncrude on them. That doesn't count the tens of thousands who work indirectly for Syncrude in everything from construction to engineering to hotels. Or take Suncor. Have you heard of Suncor? Big oil sands company. Also has gas stations now. 14,000 direct employees. But the Globe and Mail, the most authoritative newspaper in Canada, the one that goes to bed every night praying to wake up and be reincarnated as the New York Times, they just wrote that only 22,340 people in the whole country work in fields even related to the oil sands. But I just showed you that two individual companies, there's 100 companies in the oil sands, by the way, but two individual companies alone have more workers than that. More than that. How could the Globe make such an error? Well, you didn't make that error. If you were asked which employs more people, solar panels and windmills or the oil sands, you wouldn't get it wrong. It takes a special kind of know-it-all to get that so wrong. A know-it-all from Toronto who probably has never even been to the oil sands. That's the only excuse I can imagine for someone being so clueless about their own country. So where was this so-called study from? What think tank? I mean, I know most of the think tanks in Canada. There's the C.D. Howe Institute, the Fraser Institute. They're left-wing think tanks too. So who published this study that the Globe and Mail published so gullibly? And by that I mean they didn't even bother to ask anyone in their story for a contrary opinion. They didn't even bother to Google oil company employment. So who did they act as stenographers for is what I'm really asking. Well, the so-called think tank that the Globe and Mail quoted was called Clean Energy Canada. That sounds really energy-ish and really Canadian-ish, doesn't it? Well, that's their point. It's a stalking horse for the Tides Foundation. Again, Globe and Mail, Google is your friend. Clean Energy Canada is a front group for the Tides Foundation, the leading anti-oil sands extremist group in Canada. This was not a true economic study. Marin Smith, the spokesman in the Globe for Clean Energy Canada, she's not an economist. As you can see, they got their facts desperately, laughably wrong because they're not a true think tank. They're a propaganda agency bought and paid for by the Tides Foundation. This is not deep investigative journalism on my part. If you go to Marin Smith's Twitter page, her official biography proudly announces that her project is part of the Tides Canada Foundation. We've told you about them a dozen times. They're the Canadian branch plant of the San Francisco-based Tides Foundation, a left-wing group that launders money from foreign billionaires to attack Canadian oil sands. Tides Canada follows the same practice. They allow big foreign donors to hide their identities but still get Canadian charitable tax receipts, as if attacking the oil sands is charitable work. We talked about Tides Canada all last week. The protests on Burnaby Mountain that turned violent, led by Forest Ethics. Yeah, guess what? Forest Ethics is a Tides Foundation project too. Zipporah Berman, one of the ringleaders on Burnaby Mountain, works for the Tides Foundation. Ben West, same thing. Here, listen to the Tides Foundation's Ben West tell you all about their charity work.
If they try to push this project through, it would probably make Clackawanna Sound look like a walk in the park.
It's outrageous that the Tides Foundation actually passes off such political campaigning as charity work, and that the Canada Revenue Agency allows it to continue. But what excuse does the Globe and Mail have for ignoring the political nature of this think tank? But I guess if you're dumb enough to think there are more jobs working in solar power than in the oil sands, you'll believe anything. Hey, before I go, I want to show you one more thing. I showed you the truth about how many people work in the oil sands, but how many people work in so-called green energy? Where did the Tides Foundation even come up with that 23,700 jobs figure? I travel a lot, and I've never met anyone who actually builds a wind turbine or solar panels. In fact, most of them are built by foreign companies in foreign countries. Samsung from Korea or NextEra in the United States. Not a lot of jobs in Canada, except a few temporary jobs erecting those foreign-built monstrosities. Certainly not 23,700 full-time jobs. Again, just a gut check here. But what did the Tides Foundation argue for their numbers? Well, it's tough to understand. It's not actually a study. It's more of a propaganda document, a fancy poster, really, perfect for bamboozling some intern at Toronto's Globe and Mail. But look at page 5 of this report. I'm calling it a poster, really. At the top is a graph that shows in the past 5 years, there have been 2,200 green jobs created in Canada. That is such a tiny number. I actually believe it. I'm still skeptical. I mean, this is propaganda, but 2,200 people? Sure, I guess. Just add up all the lobbyists and the grant-entrepreneurs getting rich off subsidies for wind turbines. Sure, I believe 2,200 people out of a country of 35 million. But that's not the headline, is it? The headline is that item below on the page there, saying that there's 23,700 green jobs. Well, if only 2,200 of them were created in the past 5 years, what on earth are they talking about? Well, turn to page 11 in this propaganda report. Look at that. They're talking about hydroelectric dams. Look at that big one there. They mentioned the Robert Bourassa Hydro Dam. That's part of the James Bay Hydro Dam system. That was built more than 30 years ago. There are hydro dams in Canada, like at Niagara Falls, that were built more than 100 years ago. That's the fudge factor here. That's how they got 23,700 jobs. I assume they don't actually show, I'm assuming this because they don't actually show their math. But that's the only way it adds up. So they are pitching solar power and wind turbine jobs by blending those pitiful numbers in with the huge jobs in hydro dams that have been around for 100 years. I'm pro hydro dams, by the way, but just don't pretend that they're any greener than the oil sands. Sure, they don't emit carbon dioxide, but the James Bay dams there in Quebec, they destroyed 2.7 million of acres of forests in the newly created lakes behind the dams. That's a lot of trees killed, billions. Trees that greenies call carbon sinks. The oil sands impact a minuscule fraction of that, and they replant all the trees after the mining is done. There are no replanted forests where the dams made lakes in Quebec. The lakes are there forever. I'm not against those dams and the lakes, by the way. Just don't pretend they have no eco-footprint or that they don't trample on Aboriginal traditional lands. But of course, it's Quebec, so they're allowed to have development that Alberta isn't. This study is junk. It's not a study, it's a PR document. It's not a think tank, it's a lobby group. I mean, look at the thing. It is not even a report, it is a pretty poster. Perfect for low information Globe and Mail staff who have a naive dream about where power actually comes from. Hey, do me a favor. Over the next couple of days, tell me if you see on any other TV station or newspaper a critical analysis of this report. Or as I suspect, media party journalists just acting as stenographers for the Tides Foundation. If you find another journalist out there who actually asks questions about this bogus study and its bogus claims, let me know. And if you see any unicorns at the same time, let me know about that too.